Welcome, folks. You are listening to Race Matters here at WJOP Joppa Radio 96.3. I'm Eddie Carson, and this is Race Matters. Race Matters can be found on YouTube, on SoundCloud, as well as in the studio as well. So I appreciate y'all jumping in here and listening. Folks, I'm excited about our guest today. I have one of the most noted historians, particularly a historian of early colonial American history. Particularly, though, he's written a great deal thinking about evangelical history and culture, and that's what we're going to get into today. John is the department chair at Messiah College down in Pennsylvania. How long have you been down there?
20, I'm on sabbatical this year, but if this is my 23rd year there. Yeah.
Oh, congratulations. I have got to
We are
ask.
now Messiah University
Okay,
now.
Messiah
And
University.
don't get me started on that one, but yeah, I wasn't a fan of that, but yeah.
What are you working on while you're on sabbatical?
Yeah. As you know, I think, Eddie, and your listeners may not be aware of my work, but I spent a lot of time writing about the 18th century. I'm trained as an early American historian, but I also did a field in graduate school in American religious history. And as you mentioned, I'm very interested in evangelicals and politics. So I wrote a book in what was it now, 2011 maybe, called "Was America Founded as a Christian Nation?" which you've mentioned you've used in the classroom. Thank you for that. Um, and that book was a history book, but it brought me into this larger debate about sort of contemporary evangelicalism because so many, on the Christian right, especially, were debating this question, was America founded as a Christian nation? I did a couple more books, but then I wrote a book about Trump and how evangelicals came to Trump. And that then led me to my next project. I'm writing the first of 3 volumes. They're under contract with Oxford University Press on evangelicals and politics in the 21st century. So so I'm totally out of my 18th century world here, but the first book covers the years between 2000 and 2008, or roughly like the Clinton impeachment to 2000, leading up to the election in 2008. The second book will cover, if I make it that long, the Obama evangelicals in the Obama era, and then the third volume will be on Trump. Hopefully, by the time that third volume comes out, there'll be a little distance from the whole Trump phenomenon, and we can think more clearly, maybe historically, about it than politically about it. So basically, during my sabbatical, I have an August 15th deadline for that first book on 2000 to 2008. So I've been churning out,
How's it looking? You feel like you're going to
I think it's pretty good. It's a you think of Oxford as a scholarly publisher, but they're letting me write a sort of trade book for a popular audience. Some of your listeners might be familiar with the Histories of American Conservatism written by Rick Perlstein, Nixon Land and Reagan Land, and those books. I can't write as well as Perlstein, but it's got that kind of narrative feel to it, where I'm kind of trying to give a sort of ground's eye view of evangelicalism in this Bush era. I spent a lot of time at Vanderbilt University, where they have the news, the television news archives. So like I'm literally been watching like news on evangelicals, ABC Nightly News, CNN, and so forth, to get that kind of sort of visual kind of feel. So I could talk about, the cross that Gary Bauer was wearing in 2000, or that kind of thick description kind of stuff. So it's been fun. It's been fun to write, and Sometimes I feel like I'm doing journalism. It's this mix. I'm trying to approach it as a historian, but it's so close to the present.
Well,
So it's been interesting.
no, and that makes sense. I have a chapter coming out sometime. I think this coming year. I think in November or whatever. Actually, through Oxford Press.
Yeah,
And of course, I focus a lot on race and communism and socialism
yeah,
and
yeah,
W.B. Du Bois's evolution and really working with them. While primarily an academic press, they really wanted this to be accessible
yeah,
to
yeah,
a wider audience too, which is phenomenal.
yeah,
And thinking about your research now and everything, I want to start our conversation in 2008.
yeah,
And when I think about 2008, we think about this notion of, people had in a prophetic way, which has proven to be false, said Barack Obama has emerged as this prophet, as this person who would unify the races. We would see
yeah,
he would almost like the Exodus in so many ways, right? He would
yeah,
lead folks across into a land of post-racialness. And
yeah,
yet, during his term, of course, we saw the rise of the Tea Party. And, and while I hear that folks would say that at this point, we start, of course, with the birther movement, really kind of, some people say kind of the rise of Trump during this time period. I don't like to give Trump that much credit, like you said,
yeah,
because
yeah,
again, and you wrote about this and Believe Me,
yeah,
about the idea that the playbook is there. He is kind of building off of this notion where evangelical Christians have had a long history of showing up when they're threatened, particularly when whiteness is threatened. And Barack Obama was a threat to whiteness.
yeah,
I mean, I'd
yeah.
love to hear your thoughts on that
Yeah.
starting around 2008.
Well, I think you mentioned the birther movement, something that I don't think Trump ever dabbled in later, or at the time, right? 2008, because he was saying this well before 2000, or right around the time of the election. But there's also that kind of Obama is a Muslim
Mhm.
rhetoric, which the thing that the race issue with white evangelicals and Obama is very, very difficult for the historian to document with a lot of certainty, because as soon as you you have to kind of read between the lines, because no white evangelicals are saying like we don't like Barack Obama because he's black, right? No one's actually saying that, right? So it takes a certain kind of interpretation, which then always leaves you open. And by the way, I would argue you're correct about that, right? About, that they worried about he was, but you can't, it's hard to nail down the evidence. Like, what do you put in the footnote, right? Now, of course, there are some on the extremes who are just blatantly open about this, right? That we don't like a black person being president. But so
Right.
so it's not that it's not undocumentable. It's just more difficult to prove, because then any white evangelical is going to say, we didn't mean it that way, or no, you're reading into the evidence, right? We never specifically said that. But I think within the evangelical world, and the historian really has to dig deep into some of the maybe dark places of the web, or
Mm.
the places historians don't go, like chat, if there's chat rooms and so forth, where you can find this stuff. And it's very, very clear that there was a segment of the white evangelical population that feared Obama was changing the country. It ties in, I think, too, with fear over immigration, and people of color, brown people coming into the country and threatening white Protestant America. Um, there was my mother. I don't want to throw my mother under the bus here in this interview, but my mother's a kind of white evangelical. She's in her 80s now, but she would forward me these email chains, right? That would go through the sort of white evangelical world about Obama being a Muslim. He's going, he's not born in this country. Even I was just reading the other day. I really started in like 2006 or so, when Obama was considering running for president. And I just got done reading about 13 different news articles from 2006, where there was this whole debate over, whether his school that he went to in what was it, Indonesia, I think, or
No, it
Pakistan.
was Hawaii, the Panahu school.
Not the Hawaii one. When he
Oh,
was
not the Hawaii
younger,
one.
he was really young. He
Oh,
he
okay. So
he
I'm not familiar with that
he
one.
went to a Muslim school. He lived for a while with his mother and his mother's second husband in Indonesia. And the Christian right is all over this because he attended a school that they thought was some kind of Sharia, kind of school. And these were circulating all throughout white evangelicalism at the time. So it's provable. It's just more difficult to.
Yeah, but I mean, it's interesting though, because when we think about some recent scholarship and work folks are having to do that's challenging, going back to how do you footnote that and go into dark aspects of the webs, particularly chat rooms, there is a place though for ethnographic research
Yeah, yeah.
where you're taking these commentaries and saying, hey, it may not speak for the massive population, but it does speak to the genuine sentiment of a population, particularly how white people are feeling about Barack Obama.
Yeah.
And really, I'm just going to go ahead and say this rise towards, and someone's going to correct me on my language here, but really seeing not just one individual, but an entire party really delving into, and you talk about this in your book, believe me, idolatry and power of the Republican Party.
Yeah. Well,
That's
there's
it.
yeah, I mean, my sort of triumvirate in the book, my three kind of points are in that book that white evangelicals, first of all, are very fearful. They're fearful about the hold that the law, they're, this plays in the immigration, this plays in the race, right? They're very fearful they're losing white Christian America. They are trying to reclaim white Christian America through political power. What's fascinating about that, and some of the things I'm developing in this new book, is there were many different sort of, I would even say, evangelical approaches to political engagement floating around out there in the 1980s, 90s, 2000s. You have the evangelical left. You have, even to some extent, whatever you think about George W. Bush, okay, and I have some criticisms of him, especially with the war with Iraq and everything like that. His idea of compassionate conservatism, and it's just a historical point I'm making, I'm not defending Bush here, but his idea of compassionate conservatism was an alternative way of thinking about evangelical faith and politics that was different from the Christian right. And he had, one of the things I'm writing about right now actually is how many people in the black church had very positive things to say about compassionate conservatism because their social programs were getting funded under Bush. Now, again, a lot of the black church also rejected that. I don't want to speak sort of universally for the black church as well, but my historical point is that was different from, say, let's just overturn Roe versus Wade and get a marriage amendment passed, right? The sort of, I call it the dog catching the bus kind of thing. We're just chasing the bus. And then like with Dobbs' decision, they eventually caught it. Now they don't know what to do because they've never really developed any kind of political way of thinking other than just power. Right.
Yes.
And then the third part of that was, and this falls into both of our wheelhouses, just nostalgia, this nostalgia, not only let's reclaim white America, but this nostalgia for that. It was great back then, right? I think that plays very strongly even into evangelical politics. I just did a blog post about this the other day. I can't remember who put out the study, but someone did a study of the times when when Republicans, it was Republicans, it was a political thing. There were the times when Republicans thought that the world was more communal, the country was more communitarian, more moral, more, and it goes through all these lists. Almost every time it comes to the 1950s, the answer is the 1950s.
And at a period of time, right, where we're living in an apartheid state here,
Yeah,
particularly being Black, and thinking about the role of white supremacist
yeah,
groups, lynching, all of that stuff that's there. And the irony of that, John, is the fact that you do see, while people want to try to marry Black evangelicals to this movement, and you've written about this, the fact that Black evangelicals are not. I mean, this whole "Make America Great Again,"
yeah, yeah,
it's kind of like Chris Rock's line, and I heard another comedian say this once. White people can get into a time machine and they can want to travel back any time in history. For Black people, I mean, I'd venture to say, not that the 80s were great for Black people, but though we saw that burgeoning Black middle class, right, emerging, and some Black conservatives at that period. Anything before 1980, if you're Black, you're walking on dangerous.
yeah.
That's a tricky area there.
It's interesting. It's interesting what when you said about kind of white evangelicals kind of co-opting, or kind of embracing Black evangelicals. One of the things, this gets to this book I'm working on now. Historically, you probably know this better than me. Back in the 2000s, early 2000s, when I'm writing what I'm writing right now, you had this debate over gay marriage and a federal marriage amendment, right? And within the Black community, you had very, very strong opposition. There was this huge, Jesse Jackson, he was flip-flopping on this question, but there were Black church leaders who were saying, like, no, this is not the civil rights movement, right?
Absolutely.
This is not like the whole. It's amazing how much discourse was going on in 2000 that most white evangelical historians have just kind of ignored because they're not looking for it. But how much discourse there is about. So for example, I was just reading this morning, on an event in Asbury Park, New Jersey, right, where huge Black population, right? And a growing homosexual they would have used it then, gay population, right? Is retaking this in post-industrial beach town. They're reclaiming it, the gay community. They're buying into it. They're buying homes. They're putting up condos and so forth. They're really coming. It's Asbury Park becomes one of the sort of leading gay friendly, LGBTQ, we would say today, friendly cities in the Northeast. And who is their opposition? Who doesn't like them coming? The Black church, right? Now, here's the point that I want to make. So, by the way, they hold like a huge, the Black church actually holds this huge anti-gay parade one day in Asbury Park. Now, here's the point. Here's the co-opting thing I want to talk about. The white Christian right, sees this. And they immediately then, literally, I have evidence of them saying, like, if we're going to get this marriage amendment passed, we have to get Black evangelicals to lead it, right? Or else, it's not going to pass. We need to, and to some extent, like, there is language used that is sort of co-opting. We're not just going to co-opt the Black church's view on marriage, but this is our way to show that we're good. We're not racist. We're there's no systemic racism. Look at us. We're working side by side with the Black church, right? So it's really fascinating. From a historical point of view.
It's challenging. On one of my earlier episodes, I had Sylvia Swain on, and Sylvia Swain, her story is interesting, and in a sense that, so she's a white trans woman in
Hmm.
District 55 down in Alabama, in the Birmingham area.
Right.
But the interesting element for her is the fact that she is in Alabama running as a trans woman, first of all. So it's Alabama, so you have that issue.
Yep.
Then the other issue, of course, though, is she's also running in a predominantly Black district. This is in a Birmingham area as a
Hmm.
trans woman, right? And part of that campaign is, how do you talk to Black folks, particularly Black churches, about this? I thinking about something you said earlier. I mean, some folks don't remember, but Barack Obama was not pro-gay marriage
Oh
when he
yeah. Yeah.
started off his campaign and was running for office. He was playing that
Interestingly
political
enough,
ball.
Biden said supported gay marriage first. Like he went off script. Well, he was the vice president and said I support it. And then Obama had that famous interview with I think it was Robin Roberts on
Oh,
ABC.
it was Robin Roberts. I
Yeah,
remember that.
where
Of course,
he
Robin Roberts was a gay woman.
yep, yep,
So,
yeah, yeah. But you know something, what's interesting too, back to the original question about Obama, you know, I haven't seen much of this, but I would think that like white evangelicals today who maybe don't like critical race theory or DEI or these kinds of things might actually find an ally in Obama. You know,
you would
I
think
mean,
so.
oh,
But,
because
but, but, but
Obama was such a universalist, right? He wanted to appeal to all, he was kind of like he wanted to appeal to all humans, right? In that kind of enlightenment kind of way. I mean, Ta-Nehisi Coates criticized him for this, right? Cornel
oh,
West criticized him for
yes.
this. This kind of why aren't you, so yeah, you were going to say something.
No, but no, I mean, to your point, and he delves into that. All you got to do is read his book. What was it? The Audacity of Hope. I
Yeah,
mean, you
yeah,
read that book, you're like, all right, Barack, are you a Democrat? Are you a Republican?
yeah,
Are you a
yeah,
liberal
yeah,
conservative? And I always told folks that Barack Obama is about as moderate as
yeah.
they come. And the only thing you can lean on is the fact that he's Black.
That's yeah, yeah.
I mean,
It's
that is
hard
it.
to
He's
argue
Black.
with that. It's hard to argue with what you just said, because now the only other thing, the only other thing was after studying white evangelicals all these years, he was pro-choice.
That's true.
That's factoring in too. But
And,
certainly the
and, and
fact
his
that
and his name is Hussein
yeah,
Obama,
which they
right?
yeah, which
Going
they
back to
played
some of
upon.
the stuff that you
Yeah.
mentioned earlier. John, I'm curious when we think about evangelical culture, and for folks who may not be as immersed in this as we are, I study it. I will say, I'm a formal
Yeah,
evangelical Christian. I am
I knew
no
that.
the case at all. Would you define yourself as an evangelical Christian?
I would. And here's why. And people think I'm crazy, who are not evangelicals for saying this, but you know I'm a person of Christian faith. Evangelicalism is to me the good news of the gospel. The good news of salvation, the good news to the poor, good news to it's about justice, it's about the kingdom of God, it's about love, peace, mercy, right? So I want that word back. Right? They took it away from me, I sort of say, and I want that word back.
Mm.
So I'm one of these people that says, I want the 19th century evangelicalism back, right? The abolitionists, the
The William Lloyd Garrisons, who
William Lloyd
was a
Garrison,
campaigner for
right?
the, yes.
Yeah. So I think even they had some problems. I mean, most of them were also know nothing nativists too, while they were trying to end slavery, right? So it's history's complicated, right? But so yeah, so I still identify as an evangelical Christian in that sense of the word, but so when I write critical things about evangelicalism, I'm writing to my tribe in that sense. So I
I
mean,
mean,
that's how I think about it.
so so here's a question, but you've also joined the ranks of folks who could be described, and this is me saying this,
Yeah, yeah. I'll tell
as
you if you're right. I'll tell you if you're right.
okay. And my sense of you from, following you over the years and your writings, as a liberal evangelical Christian or progressive evangelical Christian. I don't know if that's fair or not. And when I think about other folks who probably fall into that corner, I think about the late Rachel Evans, for example,
Yeah, yeah,
who was, or and maybe, and I wouldn't say Rachel Evans goes as far as Jim Wallace. People who are trying to ring the alarm bells that we have a problem among evangelical Christians here,
yeah,
and here in New England, which we know statistically, historically, I wouldn't say historically, that's not right, but statistically tends to be much more suspicious of evangelicals,
yeah.
whether they're Protestants or Catholics, and we have a large Catholic population that's here too. And my students, when we talk about this stuff, when they hear the word evangelical, it scares them. Their
Yeah,
first place they go to is white supremacy,
yeah,
homophobic,
yeah,
transphobic, mean people.
yeah. Well, evangelicalism is a big tent. You know this, Ed. I mean, you know, if you want to define evangelicals as some sort of historians have been lately, and other sociologists and pundits and academics have defined it as little more than a kind of racist, Trumpian, kind of movement. Um, you're only partially right. Now, maybe we could debate how much of that portion you're right. Maybe you're 70, 81%, right? The Trump, maybe you are right, right? But evangelicals, back even to the Obama thing. Like I know a lot of white evangelicals who voted Republican all their life, who voted for Obama in 2008 because they wanted to be vote for the first black president, right? So there's people out there, and I think a lot of people who, I've for maybe the last 5 or 6 years, I have been working with Georgetown Day School in Washington, D.C. A
Oh,
very,
that's a progressive.
very
I,
progressive.
I'm very, I'm super familiar with the school.
Okay, good. So I've had them up at Messiah College. I've gone down. Well, I don't think I've gone down there yet, but I've zoomed in with them. They have this January or February term where they take a week and they try to think about the way the other world, how the other world lives, right? They try to immerse themselves in a different kind of American culture. So like I had them up in Mechanicsburg, which is sort of NASCAR country. We're walking down the main street of Mechanicsburg, and these kids are like, "Oh my gosh, this guy's flying! Here's a Confederate flag flying." It was like the first time they'd ever seen anything like that. So
And
it's
I'm from Alabama. It's frightening.
yeah. But one of the things that I appreciate about this progressive school uh, is, we have our disagreements, especially about religion, but these are some of the best dialogues I have ever had with people. The teachers, the kids, we're talking to each other. They want to know more about evangelicalism. I want to know more about them. My students want to know more about them. And we've just developed a really, really good relationship together over this. Um, over these, over the year, I guess about 4 or 5 years now, I've been working with them. So one of the things I try to get them to see, and I can't tell you how to teach, but I hope that people in your boarding school world, the progressive kind of world, is let them take them to an evangelical church. Talk to I mean, you'll find that many of the stereotypes are true. Right? At the same time, you're gonna find human beings who I think are probably much more driven by class issues, especially in poor neighborhoods and stuff, than they are by, racism or these kinds of things. Um, so yeah, so I don't know where I was going with that,
No, I
but
love it. I mean, all I know is you've got to let me bring you to my campus at Vermont Academy, which could be tough. Actually, I don't think so, because one of my concerns, and the concerns of a lot of folks, and I'm just going to be honest, I am not looking forward to this fall. And I'm not looking forward to after, and I'm thinking about the November election and really how do I get folks to talk about this stuff?
yeah,
And you use the word dialogue, particularly in a way that doesn't really rise to the animus that we saw in 2016.
yeah, yeah,
And it really, and I'd say that, and that animus it hasn't dissipated at all, especially
yeah,
looking after the January 6th situation, only ignited it even more so.
yeah.
That's there.
I mean, I think we're both historians, and I think history, this is, I have this big beef about the way history is moving right now, and we may disagree about this, but I think his history classes are really the only kind of space now where you can actually get students to kind of empathize and walk in the shoes of people with whom they have fundamental disagreements for the sake of understanding, right? I mean, if you kind of just played to those concerns that your students have about homophobia and all the evangel, I mean, what kind of education is going on there, right? If you just kind of played to those stereotypes, everyone would feel good about trashing evangelicals for 40 minutes or 50 minutes or however long your class is. And you'd all leave patting each other on the back, and no one would no one would understand these people, right? So this is why sometimes I think, I have this critique of the way the historical profession is sometimes moving, where historians are becoming preachers instead of trying to use the history classroom for understanding. Hey, be a preacher in your like ethics class or your religion class or your political science class, or there you can rip into it. But I think there is still a place in the history classroom for this kind of like, yeah, we want to be activists against this kind of garbage. But the history classroom is where you immerse yourself in their ideas. And again, you gotta take your adolescent development class. When are kids ready for this? That kind of stuff, right? But you immerse yourself in the ideas of someone you don't like. And I think as a result, you become a better activist because you know who you're arguing with.
No, and I love your point. Some people have charged history classrooms as being a place of indoctrination. And I push back on that quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things I tell my students is, they're familiar with what I do, how I think and
Yeah.
stuff. But yet, one of the things that you'll never hear them say is, Brother Carson was like forcing this on us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you will never hear one of my, and I've taught at two, I mean, you could argue right-wing, conservative, evangelical Christian institutions during my time period.
Yeah.
And my relationship with students have always been great, whether they agreed with me or not.
Well, you're gonna get hit. You're gonna get hit for not being as much. In other words, it goes both ways. Is what I'm trying to say. Like you go to what was it, Second Baptist you were at, or
I was at so we were
Baptist,
rivals with Second Baptist, Houston Christian.
Houston Christian.
And let me say this real quick. Don't hold that thought. You're going to say, because even at Houston Christian, we have the Center for George H.W. and Barbara Bush on that campus. I had both George H.W. and Barbara Bush sit in my classroom at the seminar table once.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, what I was going to say, it's incredible. Actually, I would have paid money to bid there.
And I think my head of school back then, they were like, "All right, Eddie, so
yeah. But the point, I think the point I was going to make is, right. I mean, I'm sure there was not you, I don't know, maybe you too, I don't know, but of a different kind. But I'm sure there was a lot of there's a lot of indoctrination that goes on in some of these conservative Christian schools,
A lot.
right? So let's not pretend that this is happening just in the, like, as the right wants to tell us, in these kind of progressive, I mean, they're reading David Barton and, this kind of stuff. So let's,
Oh my goodness. Did you just, oh, what was that I felt? You bring up David Barton on me, brother? Oh, that stuff still gives me grief. Oh my goodness.
gives you the EBGBs.
Oh, that is,
But the point is, like, there's got to be some kind of space in the curriculum. I'm not somebody who doesn't believe that, like, you should be discussing these questions, of ethics and politics and activism and so forth. But there's got to be some kind of space where at least you're going to pause and say, let's try to, like, think about what these people were arguing that we don't like, right? If we lose that, I fear for the sort of, then what are we doing? Is it education anymore? Or is it just, you pick the school that's going to fit with you? You pick with private schools, right? Or you pick the school that's going to preach the way you want to hear them preach. And I'll pick the school that wants to preach the way I want to hear them preach. And, so I fight for that. I'm willing to lose social capital or get attacked on Twitter or whatever to fight for that space.
so, so you mentioned, so I want to go to the Atlantic piece that came out.
Good transition.
Right, in terms of the fight. And that's a perfect spot there. And, I read that piece and talking about your relationship with your father and how, which was just really fascinating. Your father was, I mean, I think if you can remind me, you described your father as in many ways kind of this lax Catholic who became somewhat of an atheist, had his own struggles with anger and stuff. And then he really became an evangelical Protestant, started preaching a little bit more. And you talked about leaning into, what was it, James Dobson, in terms of that formation and how this was a very positive element in your life and who you are, right? And of course, when I hear James Dobson again, James Dobson is problematic to me, and and I know about the situation and the conversations between you and Kristen Dumez. I read that piece, and I know what she wrote about James Dobson. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that Atlantic piece and where that came from.
Yeah. So first of all, I'll just say up front, if you read any of my work, especially my last book, Believe Me, which you've mentioned a couple of times, I am not a big James Dobson.
No, and I understand that.
Either, right?
No, and I've read it.
I don't want your listeners to know like you're talking to like a universal defender of James Dobson. Anyway, I looked at that piece as sort of a historiographical, but also a kind of political kind of intervention into a narrative that I was seeing about evangelicalism, which I have already talked about a little bit here, about they're not all, kind of crazy racists or Trumpists or whatever. I mean, without getting into the details, I mean, my father was a patriarch. He was an ex-Marine. He had a strong hand, let's put it that way. Which mostly my butt felt. It wasn't like I don't know, people, as soon as you say that your father spanked you as a kid, like suddenly he's an abuser or whatever. I never saw him that way. Today I don't see him that way either, right? But I mean, he kept us in line, let's put it that way. Just a tough guy, just a tough, hard, white working class Italian guy, right? And ran his house like a patriarch, right? Then he got saved. Let's just use that evangelical term, right? And started listening to James Dobson and, focus on the family. He was a construction worker, so he'd play it on the radio. I did an interview somewhere with NPR about this. And, they were doing a feature on like Christian radio or something. And I was like, my dad used to like have the truck door opened on the construction site, working class kind of guy with Dobson like playing loudly so like he and everyone else could hear it. Well, Dobson was telling him, you know, you got to love your wife. You got to be a better father. You got to whatever. And, you know, I have some problems with some of Dobson's advice, especially, you know, I raised two girls,
Mhm.
which I did not draw heavily upon James Dobson, you know, in some of those things. But Dobson, listening to Dobson, becoming an evangelical, there were other evangelical writers that he would read and stuff, changed his life. It made him a better father, it made him a better husband. And that's just me, by all accounts in my family. My mother, you know, now some people will say, well, she has you know, we all have, what's that phrase, you know, Stockholm syndrome, right?
Yep.
Yeah, like we're all, you know, you know, whatever. I kind of ignore it. I mean, you know, I know he stopped spanking me. He started showing signs of love in our family, right? Became a completely different person, right? So my point was this: the line I like to say is, "My dad didn't." So let me repeat that the narrative out there, whether it be historians who I mentioned in the piece or just politicos or social media, is that Dobson equals patriarchy, and there's a lot of truth to that.
The
I'm but let me finish this, Eddie. But my dad did not need James Dobson to teach him how to be a patriarch. He was one already. He became less of a patriarch by listening to Dobson. Now, my only point in that story, to tell that story, is to offer some complexity to the narrative that's being spun out there now, especially from the ex-evangelicals. And I'm not criticizing you here, Eddie, as an ex-evangelical,
all right.
or but the historians who are now sort of defining what an evangelical is. I'm saying, where does my dad's story fit? Where does this story fit into your narrative? Because it happened, right? And I'm sure it happened. I'm sure it happened like to a lot of other people too. Right? You know, it was just more of a kind of intervention to kind of, you know, not try to debunk that narrative, because a lot of it is true, but to complicate. You know, I like to say historians make the smooth places a little more rough, right? And that's what, you know, that's what we're doing now. Again, the people advocating this narrative, and you can read the piece to see who I'm referring to there, are also trying to make the smooth places rough, right, from a previous history. So it just gets, it's history is just very complex, and I'm not quite sure how useful it is to kind of the study of history to advance like these kinds of political agendas, whether it be on the left or right. You know, it's like when I talk to Christian nationalists, they'll be like, well, George Washington said that religion was the pillar of the republic and needed to be in his. I'm like, well, yeah, he did. You know, that's why it's really hard to, like, you know, or the pine tree flag, the pine tree appeal to heaven flag was used in the American Revolution, and it's used by Christian nationalists. Both are true, right? I mean, so I guess as a historian, now I have my personal views on all this, but as a historian, you know, I want to disrupt sort of narratives. And in this one, I got a little personal with it by
Yeah,
talking.
no, and again, in terms of disrupting narratives, you're definitely doing that. And you know, and speaking of that too, you know, I love to ask you about the ongoing, I don't want to say conflict between you and Kristen Dumas that's taking place. And you got to know when that blew up, my inbox blew up too. Eddie, did you see this? Are you following what's going on? Do you feel that it just kind of got blown out of proportion? You know, because when I read
Oh,
your work, when I read Kristen's work, you know, y'all in many ways are saying a lot of the same stuff.
yeah, you didn't prep me for this question. And,
My apologies, brother.
no, I'll take a shot at it.
And look, you know, only say what you want to say. You don't have to say any of that.
Kristen and I are saying some of the same things. You're right. We should be on the same page. Um, and some of it, at least to me, um, in a few Twitter exchanges, I felt it became personal, and they began to question my all this stuff I just said about making the smooth places rough and so forth. I felt her, Beth Allison Barr, how should I put this? We're throwing my understanding of history. A lot of this blew up during and this is really in the weeds for your
Well,
listeners,
no,
but
go for it though. They can learn a little bit.
The James Sweet controversy in the American Historical Association, where a University of Wisconsin professor said he was worried about historians being too activist and thus missing things because they were cherry picking from what they needed. And I defended James Sweet while a lot of progressive historians and left historians did not. Later, I learned half the University of Wisconsin history department was also defending James Sweet, but they were not going out and tweeting about it. So I actually had conversations about this with members of that department when I was out there speaking at Madison at some last year. So I didn't like the way in which I like both of their books. I like Beth Allison Barr's book and Kristen Kobes-Dumay's book as pieces of scholarship. But I felt that their books took on a life of their own. And I should have made this clear in the Atlantic piece. They, with huge social media followers, began to be the kind of pinpoints, if you will, of this anti-evangelical narrative that I pushed against in that Atlantic piece. So I criticize them. I've talked to Kristen privately about all of this before the piece came out. I haven't talked to her since the piece came out, but I respect both of them as historians. I just want to, again, I said before, willing to fight for a kind of doing of history that or teaching of history, because I'm just as much of an activist when it comes to like my blog and what I write and stuff. But to me, I come out of this as a teacher of history. And if their social media feeds are anything similar to what they do in a classroom, I have a problem with that.
I
So
understand.
we're gonna have to this is something I'm gonna have to work through with them.
Yeah.
And I
Well, and I think knowing you, and have read Kristen's stuff. I attended one of her lectures. I tend to go down to the Christian Scholars Conference that's usually hosted at an evangelical Christian school annually down at Lipscomb
I've
University.
spoken at that. I've been at that. I was on a session with Randall Balmer and Molly Worthen on
And
evangelical.
I do know Randall.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I hate. What year were you there?
This was like 2, 3 years ago. It was like right after COVID broke. I
Okay,
don't
yeah,
remember seeing you there. Yeah, yeah.
I
It was
probably
like,
missed that.
yeah, it was close to COVID. In fact, they were even thinking about canceling it, but they decided to do it. Yeah.
I mean, I hope we run into each other again there. And I've been wanting to venture back to the AHA. I've been, I'm going to try to grab Edward Bloom and see if he'll join me. Maybe
Yeah.
I can pull you into the fold on
I would
something
I would
too.
just I don't know how our time is doing here, but can I just
We
add
have,
one
we
more
have, we
thing
have a few minutes. Yeah, I
about
want to
the
give you as much space as you need.
Dumez bar thing? A
Yes.
lot of this too centered around the conference on faith and history, which I was the president of. And I like, I don't know how you'll take what I'm about to say,
No,
but
brother, this is
but
your
I
space.
but I gave a presidential address at Baylor, but before I went, Kristen Kobes-Dumay and Jamar Tisby
Yep,
uh,
Jamar, he
gave
wrote, I read his, what was it, The Compromise of Color?
Color of Compromise,
Color of Compromise, yes.
gave plenary addresses. Jamar a little more than Jamar a little more than Kristen, but I felt Jamar used the opportunity at a history conference to kind of, like, I didn't disagree with anything he said, but I think he used it to preach. I mean, at one point he asked, "Can I start preaching now?" And he was quoting Bible verses, and and I just, as the president of the organization, I just thought like this is not a history speech, right? And Kristen did this to some of a degree too in her speech, chiding the Conference on Faith and History for not having enough women, right, in it. And that's true. It's a problem. The conference before, Beth Allison Barr gave a speech about women in the CFH, and they all got standing ovations, and I just said, what is happening here? I agreed with the content, but are these appropriate speeches for a history conference, right? Could you imagine someone at the AHA like whipping out the Bible and starting?
I don't think that would happen at the
Yeah,
AHA.
yeah.
Folks might actually walk out of the
So
room.
now, granted, we're a faith-based
Right.
institution, so there is Christian thinking that goes on, right? But so then I got up there. I was the last to speak, and I gave. You can read this in the journal Fides et Historia. It's now published in there. I gave a kind of nuanced take about the 1968 AHA convention and how the activists Howard Zinn and Staunton Lind were going up against Eugene Genovese, a Marxist,
Very familiar with all of them.
yeah, over whether, so I was like, where do we come down as the CFH? Are we activists? Are we more like Genovese? Are we, should we respect the historical discipline? And I didn't come down either way. I said at different points in one's career, one might become more activist, and, so I thought I gave a nuanced speech. And on social media, there was subtle backlash to that speech, and there were some other things that happened, and I eventually resigned as the president of the Conference on Faith and History because I just felt I had argued enough where I had come to a point where I was kind of not probably the best person to lead this organization anymore. Again, my speech wasn't never mentioned any names or anything. It was just kind of, using a historical example like the 1968 AHA, where you had Marxist against Marxist fighting over the discipline of history.
Marxists and Marxists arguing. I'm being facetious here. I've never heard that happen before.
Yeah.
That's a first.
But over the discipline of history, where you had like conservative people like Forrest McDonald during that event standing up and like supporting Staunton Lynn and Howard Zinn because he wants to promote activist conservative ideas. And Genovese is like, you got to be kidding me. He calls that's a great moment in American.
I mean, that's one I need to delve deeply into, being very familiar with both Genovese and Zen stuff. And of course, I heard Zen give a plenary talk back in, I want to say this was probably the year before he passed away, at like some social studies education conference or something. And I was speaking.
He was very popular in that group. Yeah.
Oh, very. And this was in Houston. Nowadays, I don't know if they'll let him land into the state of Texas, just kind of where Texas is gone. We're getting close to time here. And, John, I just want to say I appreciate everything you've had to say. This has been fun. I going on to this episode, I was aware that I'm going to get here with you, and I'm just going to want to listen to you and talk to you all day, knowing that we can't do that. I do want to applaud I recently looked at your Twitter or X, or whatever they call it these days, and I love the shout out you gave to Birmingham Southern College, noting that the Birmingham Southern College baseball team will last longer than the college. And for the record, I'm a fan of Birmingham Southern College, and
Are you?
I am actually. I think there are things that they do that are not. I would put them more on a positive side of
the college. Not. I thought you were like following the baseball team.
No, but look.
The college. Okay.
Yeah, no, on the college, on the positive side, and I was hoping that deal, in which I've been meaning to talk about this with other folks, that people missing a boat, that a historically Black college wanted to bail this school out.
Yeah.
I think like 52 million and offering them money to save jobs. And I have no idea what's happening with that situation. I don't think it's going to work out.
It has Methodist. I think it has Methodist roots, Birmingham.
I don't know if it
considers itself a kind of faith-based school or not, but
they do.
They do. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. So I just wanted to, I love that tweet there because I've been following what's been going on down at Birmingham Southern quite a
Well,
bit.
the story is great because here's this college that's closing. What's the date today? It's closing in 4 days. And on the day it closes, their baseball team is playing in the Division III World Series. I mean, and it's and it's not an elimination series, so they're gonna play after, even if they lose May
They're
31st,
still playing.
they're still playing. It's a round robin. So,
I was unaware of the baseball situation until I saw your tweet.
yeah.
And I sat there and I thought, that is irony. Um, John, I always like to give my guests the last word. And folks who are chiming in, this is Race Matters. I'm Eddie Carson. I'm here with noted historian John Fia from Messiah University, who's joining in to talk to us about really a lot of things dealing with evangelical culture here at WJOP, Joppa Radio. John, brother, I want to say thank you, and I'd like to give you the last word on whatever is on your mind.
Well, as long as we're discussing these questions of race and so forth, I wrote a piece at an online magazine I edit now, called our executive editor, currentpup.com, current history teachers out there. Stop teaching critical race theory because, now wait, let me finish. Because critical race theory is American history. It is. If you study American history,
It's
you
all
have
critical
to
race theory.
embrace critical race theory. So stop calling it critical race theory. Just teach American history.
John, thank you so much, brother. I appreciate you giving up your time during your sabbatical, doing the great research and writing that you're doing and everything. And let's stay in touch. I'll follow up.
Definitely. I appreciate you too, Eddie.